Welcome to The Breach Show, featuring sharp analysis on politics and social movements in Canada. I'm your host, Desmond Cole. Since last year's federal election and a floor crossing in the current session of Parliament, only 6 members of the New Democratic Party remain in the House of Commons. One of those members of Parliament, Leah Gazan, grew up in a political household and found her way to elected office through advocacy. The NDP convention to choose a new leader later this month will take place in Winnipeg, which Gazan represents in Parliament. What has her path in political life taught her about adversity and renewal? And how does she think the NDP can regain influence in Canadian politics? Joining me to discuss all of this, of course, is Leah Gazan, the MP representing Winnipeg Centre. Hello, Leah.
Thanks so much for having me, Desmond.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for joining us. And as we get started, just a reminder to our audiences to please like and subscribe if you want more bold journalism for transformation. And one note, given that we're talking about the NDP leadership race and specifically the leadership campaign of Avi Lewis, we want to disclose to our audiences that Martin Lukács, the managing editor of The Breach, is an advisor to the Lewis campaign. So Leah, we know that the last election for the NDP was a rough one. You lost official party status and a lot of experience in your caucus. You also saw the departure of your leader, Jagmeet Singh. So I want to ask you to begin, how different has this last year been from your previous years in politics?
Well, I'm going to be totally honest with you. It's tough. It has been tough losing official party status. You know, we might only be 6 now. I know a lot of people were pretty taken aback by the floor crossing. I have to tell you, I do think floor crossing is undemocratic and unethical. I strongly support the NDP position that those decisions need to be left up to voters. But here's what I know. You know, prior to getting elected, as you mentioned, Desmond, I've spent my life in the movement. Movements are not linear. Movements ebb and flow. And if you look at history, some of the greatest defeats on the left have become our strongest movements rising up again. I believe we're in one of these moments. And so I know how to maneuver this platform still, in spite of it all. I'm going to give you an example, Desmond. Just before summer break, the last summer break, I worked on the ground with First Nations leadership across the country, specifically, though, with members of Grand Chief Elvin Fiddler's treaty area, Treaty Number 9. And we were able to push the government on Bill C-5. Now, we know Bill C-5 passed in an unprecedented rate, but it did force the government to go on a mass what I called a mass disinformation tour because of the truth telling that we were able to extend to the public. I believe that we are seeing what I called out, in fact, in 2019. And people were like, Leah, that sounds too radical. And what I said in my nomination is I said, we are at a time when we are seeing a growing corporate dictatorship. Now we're now 2026. We have Amazon, we have Elon Musk, we have Trump. And quite frankly, we have a prime minister who is involved with one of the biggest corporations, Brookfield Investments, who's been elected. I think it has a shelf life because people know that the system is rigged to lift up the corporate elite. You can't even buy groceries at a grocery store. It's taken over by monopolies. One of the reasons, in fact, that I did endorse Avi Lewis, because I liked his idea about a public option for food, his focus on public housing, and I think that will garner support. So is this a bump? 100%. Do I think this bump is going to last? Not from what history tells me, and certainly not from the energy that I've seen during the leadership race.
First, I just want to mention that it's Laurie Idlot, the MP from Nunavut, that crossed the floor recently from the NDP to the Liberals. But yes, before we get on to the ongoing leadership campaign and the future of the party, I want to talk a little bit about you and how you got here. I mentioned that you grew up in a political household. Both of your parents were active in the Cooperative Commonwealth, which was the predecessor to the New Democratic Party. How did your parents' political involvement influence you?
You know, I am a descendant of genocides from two different parts of the world. My father was a Holocaust survivor, the only surviving child after the war, two uncles, my grandparents, and my father. And my mom was a Chinese Lakota woman from Wood Mountain Lakota Nation, grew up in child welfare at the time of residential schools, spent time as an orphan in a Catholic orphanage, was a pretty rough experience, 15 placements between 5 and 18. And I think the way my parents dealt with that is through activism and fighting for a better world. And my father was a very devout atheist. My mom was a traditionalist, but I think particularly for my father, the politics of social democracy became his religion. So, and I've been talking a lot with my sister lately because in our discussions, we talk about how we've been training for this our whole life. We grew up with a father who was a war survivor who had this fear of fascism. And although my parents were lovely, they were funny, and all of those things, I don't want to make it sound like my life was horrific. It was pretty serious in my household. I wasn't allowed to play Monopoly because it was this, the whole premise is about building up a corporate regime that leaves so many people behind. And so instead, I got this game called Our Town, and it was a cooperative game. And the goal of the game was to build a community together. Well, Desmond, it had 0 out of 5 rating on entertainment value. 0 out of 5. like, it was pretty serious. It's like, you need to build a community. Let's do a game. It's totally not fun. We'll call it Our Town and go to. Like, politics wasn't something that was important. It was a way of life. And it was essential for the protection of humanity. It had that level of seriousness in my house. We're finding ourselves in a time when we see fascism fascism rising south of the border, ICE, all of these things, paramilitary police in the United States. We see bills being passed in Canada right now, and being in a party that doesn't have official status, that almost every single bill that the Liberal government has passed violates the Constitution, violates the Charter, violates international law. Bill C-12 violates the rights of asylum seekers, refugee claimants, and temporary foreign migrant workers. We are beholden to uphold international conventions that we have signed on to. It is in violation of that. Bill C-9, the right to freedom of speech and the right to assembly. And the list goes on. Bill C-5, which violates Section 35, Section 35(3) of the Constitution, and violates the right to free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous people. So we're seeing all of this happening. So I've been sitting in the house, and I feel this despair. And I had time to reflect, leaving after a really hard week. And then I remembered what my parents told me, Desmond. What they told me is that movements are not linear, as I said. They ebb and flow. We're seeing that in the party, but we're also seeing that with so many people across the country who have maybe taken democracy for granted, something I was never privileged to do. Maybe have been kind of apathetic about getting involved politically or watching the news, beginning to rise and say, I am not happy with what's happening in the world. We see that in the States. so many people rising against ICE. We see that in Canada, all the people rising against Bill C9, Bill C5, Bill C12, saying, I don't want to live in a country that breaks the law. And so I have a lot of hope. I have hope growing up in a political family with parents who managed to change legislation against all odds. I think we are in a dark time, a difficult time, but a beautiful time of renewal and growth. And I'm proud to be part of a party that is looking internally right now. And I believe that coming out of the leadership, we will be a source of goodness, of humanity that is so lacking in political discourse these days.
You mentioned how movements ebb and flow, and there was a big surge of advocacy during the years just as you were coming into elected office. And I'm talking about specifically the Idle No More movement and the struggle to have justice for murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. You were very involved in this advocacy. And I wonder what was that drew you to that organizing work and how you've tried to bring it into your work in Parliament.
Well, I think that's just a couple of examples of work, Desmond, that I've been doing my whole life. Like when I was 4, people remember, like the OGs and the NDP, remember me being like 4 or 5 years old, folding pamphlets. They remember me door to door campaigning with my dad. My dad used to say, if I didn't have a family, I'd be fighting with the Sandinistas. You know, I grew up in that. I don't know more, though. I want to speak specifically. So, I mean, you asked me what drew me to that.
Yes.
I just grew up in the movement. It's not, I never had the privilege to be drawn. It was a family expectation. Like people always ask me, what drew you to politics? I'm like, you know, I've been training for this my whole life. Like, it's just, it's just my lot. It's my lot in life. This is how we survived. This is what kept our spirit alive, Desmond. It's very deep. But I want to talk specifically about Idle No More. Idle No More was monumental in the way that, you know, as somebody, like I was camping out at the ledge when I was 18 during the siege of Ganasatawge, for example, at 18 years old. I was working at Richardson and Green Shields as a facsimile operator. Like I'm that old. They actually used to hire people to do faxes back in the day.
I love
And
that.
then in the evening, I would go camp out at the legislative grounds in Manitoba in a solidarity camp with folks and some of my dearest friends now that just are my greatest inspiration, Ellen Gabriel, you know, in solidarity with those folks that were opposing the building of a golf course at the time. And um, we were alone. We didn't have allies. It was Indigenous people and we were alone. Bring it to Idle No More. It was the first time in my lifetime that I saw true allyship. People from all walks of life who came together around a common cause, whether it was for the protection of water, right, or a greater commitment towards reconciliation, the beginnings of reconciliation. Idle No More really set the stage for that. And what was really, I think, change making about Idle No More is that we were able to get support through actions of resistance that really represented unity and belonging, and that we are all responsible for each other. And I say that because of the round dances. We would hold hands and round dance everywhere. We'd round dance in malls. We would round dance in front of the ledge. We would round dance on Portage and Main. And what are you going to do? Like, you see all of this military pushback against people exercising their right to freedom of expression and the right to protest. What are you going to do with people who are dancing? Are you going to take a baton and kick them down? So I think not only was it really powerful joining hands across all walks of life, all cultures, all races, all different backgrounds. I think it was really monumental in the way that it was done through acts of unity and resilience. Now, I want to be really clear. It's not always that smooth. It can't always be that smooth, but I think certainly in that instance, it certainly was a moment for people to pause, and even people who didn't take notice of these things started taking notice and getting involved.
You also took interest during your time in Parliament. You have taken interest in benefits provided to Canadians during the COVID-19 pandemic. And here I'm talking about you fighting for the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, or CERB, to become permanent. Presented a motion on this, which did not pass, but you've continued to advocate for some form of basic universal income, or UBI, in this country. Given the many different approaches to addressing poverty in Canada, why do you support UBI?
Well, I want to be really uh, careful about using universal basic income. It's a guaranteed livable basic income. I'll tell you
Okay.
why. Because we already have income guarantees in the country. So I'm actually not offering up anything new. EIA, like social assistance or welfare, is an income guarantee. It's not livable. GIS is another example of an income guarantee. It's not livable. All I am trying to push for is to make current income guarantees livable and expand them out to many folks that are falling through the cracks. Poverty is a human rights choice. Poverty is a policy choice. Um, in fact, the PBO did a study, Desmond.
That's the Parliamentary Budget Office.
Yeah, Parliamentary
Yeah.
Budget did a study that it would cost less to provide people with a guaranteed livable basic income than it would to restructure the current EI system and update it. What did the Liberals choose to do? They chose to do that. They chose to do that instead. We did a study, for example, in Manitoba. What we found through the Dauphin study with a guaranteed livable basic income is that health improved, education levels improved, people were able to actually pursue things they wanted. So what costs in the what we know about costs, front costs, we know there's long-term savings in healthcare, in justice. We know that the more education you have, the better you'll do economically. We know that. We know that if you have a grade 12, if you're able to graduate from high school and get some level of post-secondary, that you do better. And there are countries around the world that have this. You know, mind blowing, Desmond. Can you imagine a place where we actually had, um, you know, public housing as a main priority of a government, guaranteed livable basic income, free post-secondary education? As somebody who is a longtime post-secondary educator, can you imagine if people who went to university wasn't a result of being privileged, but a result of their talents? That people weren't excluded on the basis of the income? So I'm going to keep pushing for that. I think it's abhorrent that we have a growing number of seniors across the country that are living in deep poverty. We are seeing an unprecedented amount of seniors ending up in shelters, or the 70% of adults with intellectual disabilities who live in poverty. And the other thing I think we need to think about, Desmond, is that, even on the left, I think we need to be cautious about placing the value of a human being, their right to dignity on their productivity.
Mm.
Not all of us are born the same. Some of us can do really well working 2 days a week, but might not be able to hold a full time job down 5 days a week. Many people live with complex mental health and trauma issues, for example, who might do great working 2 days a week, but they have other needs that they need to care for so that they can be a healthy human being. I think we need to move away for the value of a person being based solely on them as a worker, and really look at lifting up our charter, particularly Article 7, which affirms the right, confirms the right to dignity and security of all people, regardless. That's all I'm proposing to do. In addition to other specific benefits and supports meant to meet specific and special needs, like affordable housing with rent geared to income.
Thank you for that clarification. In 2019, you defeated Robert Falcon-Ouellet, a Liberal incumbent in Winnipeg Centre, to join the House of Commons for the first time. And I understand that you were able to draw in a lot of new people to your campaign, folks who hadn't necessarily been previously engaged in party politics. That skill is something that the broader party, the NDP, seems like it could really use right now. So in your opinion, how did that happen? How did you manage to bring in people who might have been on the outside of politics? And how can the broader NDP, what can it do to renew itself right now during this leadership and beyond?
Well, I think it's connected to me being in movements. And full disclosure, that's one of the reasons why I decided to like really strongly voice Avi Lewis, was because he's really connected to movements. A lot of people think of people getting elected, that's the beginning of their career. We have long lives before we get elected to parliament. It's not like we go in there like a tabula rasa with like no knowledge, right? So I don't buy the argument that you have to be elected, you have to have the experience to know how to do the job. Um, I don't buy that argument. I certainly didn't. I was certainly the underdog because I did come from the movement. I was not the establishment candidate going in. I think even a number of years ago, I think people are really, really craving for elected officials that are willing to speak a truth to power, who are not attached to their power and privilege, who are very clear about their values, very clear about positions they take. Um, and I've done that. I made a nomination speech. I ran on a platform. I've now been elected 3 times. I've been elected for almost 7 years. And I've stayed true to the promises that I made during the nomination. So I think being honest, being truthful, and being an unapologetic socialist attracted a lot of people. Um, I'm not a liberal. If I wanted to be a liberal, I'd join the Liberal Party. I come from a line of CCFers. I come from a family of New Democrats. I would never think it's okay to get mushy on my values for political expediency. I think we need to move away from that in the party. I think it's cost us. I think we saw how it cost us in the last election. And we are in a very serious time, and we need to be clear. We need to be clear, and we need to. And people are saying, "I'm sick of being the social conscience of Canada." And what I have to say to that is that what's wrong with having a social conscience? Why is that such a negative thing? I ran for politics because I do have a very deep social conscience. So I've used that clarity. I find Avi the same way. I mean, we share a lot in common. He grew up in the party. His parents were really actively engaged, lifelong New Democrats, but he also has been unapologetic about his positions. I think people are craving it right now, and I think that's how you inspire people to join the NDP. Clearly, what we've been doing has not been working. One only has to look at maybe what happened down south, but we've been going down in seats for an awful long time before Trump came into the picture. We need a new direction for this party. We need a new direction that's the old direction, which is being true to our values as democratic socialists. I think that's what's allowed me to keep my seat. But I think that's also been something that's allowed me to get things done in Parliament. Can I tell you a funny story? Am I going on and on, Desmond? This is a
No, go
funny
ahead.
story. I won't name the name. So one of the conservative parliamentarians came up to me and they were like, "Oh, you have influenced the party." I said, I don't. Like, it's not really that. I'm just principled. I stay true to my values. And they said, Leah, I don't agree with anything that you say. I agree with nothing you say. But I respect you. And I responded, you know what? I agree. I have never agreed with anything that you have shared, ever. But at least I know who you are. People know who I am. I don't have to make up stories. I don't have to change what I'm saying to sound better because what I'm saying is the truth. People are not stupid. We need to stop treating the electorate like they're stupid, and we need to stop being so calculated and snappy in how we put out messaging and treat human beings where they are at as human being with all our differences. Some people will say, Leah, I disagree with this and this and this about you, but at least I know who you are. That's why I'm going to vote for you. People feel really apathetic about politicians because I think the political discourse doesn't respect the electorate. I see that in Avi. I know who he is. I know his positions. I have different opinions with him on some things, not many things. But at least I know who I have endorsed. I know the positions that he's taking. I think they're needed for what he talks about to, having solutions that equal the crises we face right now, he's saying, and I agree with him.
I want to get to Avi Lewis, but I just want to quickly follow up on something you said, which was about kind of renewing the party through returning to some old values. And I've been hearing this a lot during the campaign, the talk about, especially after last year's election, some of the stalwarts of the NDP being like, we've got to return to our roots. For you, what is it about the previous political tradition of the NDP that you and others are hoping to recapture now?
So I remember Desmond, because remember, like, this is a life journey for me. I remember being a little kid from a family with interracial parents, which is not a big deal now. It was when I was growing up. I was like weird, right? Not only were my parents intense, but our family composition was weird at the time. You didn't see a lot of kids from interracial parents. When I was like, I'm 53, I still had to do, like, when I was in school, they made me do a band with a feather and make drums out of coffee cans and do this in a fake powwow, and I burst into tears. I was in grade 3, right? I mean, like, that's the generation I came from. And so when you're a kid like that, you kind of know you don't belong. But when I would go to an NDP event, I always felt this like deep belonging as a child because I saw people that looked like me. We talk about bread and butter issues. I think that's a very naive analysis. When we talk about bread and butter issues, that's different for everybody. Bread and butter for you, Desmond, might be different for me. For me, as an Indigenous, interracial woman, um, might be different. So I think that's a very naive analysis. Bread and butter issues for my family felt reflected in the party. And that meant that issues related to economic justice, social justice, climate justice, uh, issues that related to military spending. My dad was a pacifist. We found a place there. My dad lost jobs for wearing peace buttons in the 60s, his teaching job, you know? I'm proud of those values. The fact that we see rising fascism and we know the first groups that are impacted, immigrants, C12, C2, women, C12 impacts our rights. Just look in the States, women, bodily autonomy, the 2S LGBTQIA plus community, particularly trans folks. We're seeing all these tenets of fascism rising, something I've been fighting against my whole life. An attack on workers, one of the reasons I have Bill 107 to get rid of the back to work legislation.
You've talked a lot about Avi and mentioned Avi Lewis in this conversation. So let's talk about that directly now. You have said in endorsing Avi Lewis that he can, quote, blow open the doors of our movement, making it a home for everyone who believes in economic, social, and environmental justice, unquote. This is a big expectation. So why do you believe Avi Lewis is the person who can live up to it?
I'm not into the God thing, like the God complex thing, or putting and I talk about this a lot when people are like, "Oh, Leah, you're so," and I'm like, "You got to stop worshiping leadership, because my power comes from you. We're actually really unimportant, Desmond. I'm going to get back to Avi because it's all about this, why I'm supporting Avi. We're actually the least important in the way that we are one vote away from losing our job. That's how important we are. One vote. Can you imagine? And if you look at Terrebonne in Quebec, literally it was one vote, and now they're having another election. One vote away. So it's a very true statement. The power of change comes from people moving together to push for change. Because the whole point of politics for most elected officials is maintaining their power and privilege. They will do anything to maintain that power and privilege, and they will only shift gears when they see that power and privilege threatened. Avi understands that. Avi understands that he is running to be a spokesperson for broader movements, coalescing broader movements together, to join together, to push in a united front against rising fascism, rising white supremacy, a rising corporate dictatorship, growing inequality, poverty, a violation of human rights. And we can only achieve that together. And that's why I'm supporting Avi. Because I think he fundamentally understands that even his power, the foundation of any power he should receive, it is the mass of people moving together. Which is why doors will be broken open, because he's opening those doors.
Now, I understand this idea of de-emphasizing, the godliness of the leader and talking about the broader movement. But if Avi Lewis were to win, he would be the second leader in a row now within the NDP without a seat in parliament. And I feel like the focus is going to very quickly, if he were to win, uh, zero in on this idea that you have a leader who's not in the House of Commons. So, given the fragile nature of minority parliament that we're in right now, does this concern you that, possible elections looming and a real desire among many people for an alternative, that the person that you're supporting is going to have to then immediately engage in this struggle to get into the House?
100% hot no. Can I tell you why? Jack Layton
Okay.
didn't have a seat. Our last leader didn't have a seat. That's not the biggest problem we have as a party right now. We have not been effective in communicating to the public. Avi's an excellent communicator. One only has to look at his campaign and the hundreds and hundreds of people that have come out, sold out. Not that they cost anything, but like the RSVPs maxed out. I was just in Ottawa. There was like almost 800, if not 800 people there. I'm not worried. What I'm worried is if we go along the same trajectory that we've been on, it's over. Why? Because we need to be courageous. We need to be bold. Avi has been courageous and bold. He certainly is feeling the pushback for that. And I'd rather stand with somebody who is truthful enough to let people know who he is and let membership decide, rather than toxic politics to skew people in another direction. I think our party deserves better than that. I think members deserve better than that. And I think the electorate uh, deserves better than what I call toilet politics. And I'll tell you, Desmond, in elections, I've always done my own mailers. I never talk about anybody else. I talk about what I'm going to do. I talk about what I'm going to accomplish. Why? Because I feel that the electorate needs more respect, deserves more respect at a time when they're struggling than to hear people badmouth each other. And that's why I'm supporting Avi. I've been impressed by his campaign. I like the way they've taken the high road, and that's classy.
Well, as we go into the convention in Winnipeg, I have one more question for you about this. Another criticism that I have been hearing about Lewis is that he hasn't led any movement or organization large enough to prepare him for the challenges of party leadership. And I wonder, do you think that that is a fair concern?
Well, I think it's bigger than Avi. Like, any leader surrounds himself with a team. I think he has a superb team. Um, I don't think anybody, uh, going into these positions, I think, there's always going to be naysayers. But I would believe it if I didn't see the campaign and how it's been going and how many, how many hundreds of people show up at events all over. Like, even in BC, in small communities, where there's a smaller population, like he's packing the house. People are craving somebody who will have their back, speak truth to power, and fight for change. I think that's a winner. And I think when your whole focus becomes on winning and not what you're fighting for, you're a loser. I think we need to think about that in the NDP. We have a message, we have a political movement that is a winner. Let's focus on that message, and the results will naturally follow.
Well, it's not long now before we find out who the next leader of your party is going to be. The Breach is really excited to be in Winnipeg for the convention, Leah.
So am I. You're going to be in my riding, you know that?
Yeah,
Home
absolutely.
of the Winnipeg Strike, home of J.S.
Well,
Woodsworth. Yes, the best riding in the country, Winnipeg Center.
I hope that you'll be able to meet us and welcome us when we get there.
You bet. I will be there.
And in the meantime, thank you so much for having this conversation with us today, Leah. We really appreciate it.
Bye.
If you like what you've heard on The Breach Show, please subscribe to the podcast. And if you want to support our work, please become a sustaining member to help us produce more journalism for transformation. And you can do that by going to breachmedia.ca/support. Thanks for listening.